Here, and I am here for another episode of Climate Science Chat, where we dive into what the climate scientists are talking about. And this is in order to help amplify the scientists' messaging and help to spread the good word on both what the climate scientists are chatting about and on confronting various issues, crises, and problems that confront our world from a climate scientist perspective. And one of the climate scientists that we like to read and talk about and listen to is Dr. Michael Mann. And I did want to highlight this post from Charles P. Pierce about an article in Esquire magazine where it appears that the MAGA the funders of the what I would call anti-American MAGA wing of the Republican Party, who style themselves as libertarians but don't really seem to be for any kind of real liberty at all, more so just for promoting anger, bigotry, violence, harm, the harmful accumulation of wealth. It does appear, according to this Esquire article, that Leonard Leo wants to use his dark money to destroy liberalism. And this of course is the center of the whole right-wing culture war on America, where anything that is good and just and counter to, say, for example, racism is attacked. um, I mean, for example, like the word woke means aware of systemic racism and sensitive to inequality. So of course the right-wing extremists and bigots are going to attack that. And of course, critical race theory was a study of systemic racism in outcomes in law, in justice. And so, of course, the crazy, bigoted right-wingers were going to attack that as well. And so now it appears that various billionaires are going to try and use their dark money to destroy liberals again. I don't know. The ongoing assault by billionaires on liberals is just never ending. And to me, it just highlights how authoritarian they are. They want to tell you how to what to think and how to think. And their methods of thinking, what they're telling you is pretty hateful, pretty ugly, pretty nasty, pretty violent, pretty backward. Um, and liberalism, which has as its word, you know, liberal. The root word for liberal is freedom. Liberals celebrate democracy, shared governance, and progress, among other things, as well as enlightenment and knowledge. So the assault by Peter Thiel and others on knowledge and enlightenment is and real freedom is as harmful as it is brazen, as it is vile. And Dr. Michael Mann's highlighting yet the most recent push in the culture war on America, the culture war by right wing extremist billionaires and oligarchs, that has been very harmful. And it's worth noting that one of the major proponents of this war on liberalism is also a major funder of MAGA, and Donald Trump, and in his own assault on the real freedoms of America, most recently in his attempted coup attempt to overthrow our democracy on January 6th, and the continued threats of civil war coming from that faction, that very harmful faction of politics that our adversaries such as Vladimir Putin like to cheer on. And even more recently, I'd just like to highlight that Peter Thiel has come under speculation for his role in the Silicon Valley bank collapse. So kind of interesting link there. And I already talked about the definition of liberal and the root word for liberal meaning free. So Dr. Michael Mann here talking about the culture war on America by right-wing extremists. Of course, Dr. Michael Mann has been the target of attacks by and defamation by the right for many, many years now, and has managed to survive all of these attacks with both style and aplomb. So kudos to Dr. Michael Mann. Moving on to Professor Catherine Hayhoe, she is retweeting a post by Dr. Leah Stokes about the giant algae bloom that has grown throughout the large portions of the Caribbean, um, and the origin of this algae bloom has been subject of much study and speculation. But I just want to read this post. It does appear that there is now a link between fossil fuel burning and petrochemicals and this massive algae bloom that is sweeping across parts of the Caribbean is now threatening parts of Florida. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote by Dr. Leah Stokes. A strange giant algal bloom is devastating beaches around the world, growing worse year after year. Burning fossil fuels is likely fueling this problem. Maybe we should stop burning fossil fuels, just a thought. So Professor Catherine Hayhoe retweeting a tweet by Leah Stokes. Leah doesn't seem to be concerned at all about a need for fossil fuel burning, and there's, like the rest of the climate scientists that we have, solutions to fossil fuel burning in the way and means of clean energy. So let's just go ahead and mass deploy that and stop burning fossil fuels so we don't have all these various problems. I did want to talk a little bit about the giant blob of seaweed heading for Florida in the New York Times article that Leah is citing here. And I just want to highlight this quote. Fossil fuel emissions and the burning of biomass such as trees after deforestation produces nutrients that could be helping the sargassum to grow. So the sargassum seaweed is clogging up the Caribbean and heading toward Florida. And apparently there's increased evidence of a link between this massive sargassum seaweed bloom and fossil fuel burning and the burning of biomass. Surprise, surprise. All right, so moving on, I'd like to highlight Dr. Gavin Schmidt, who is the, I believe, who is a climate scientist, NASA GISS head, a major promoter and contributor to realclimate.org, and a powerful voice on the issue of climate change, one of our best researchers when it comes to climate as well. And Dr. Gavin Schmidt is retweeting Peter Sinclair, who is posting Peter has been tracking Americans' concern over climate change for some time now. And apparently, more Americans than ever are now alarmed about the issue of climate change. Apparently, 26% of Americans are alarmed about the issue of climate change. 27% are concerned, which means 53% of Americans, if I'm doing my maths correctly, are either alarmed or concerned about the issue of climate change. So, and less and less people are either disengaged, doubtful, or dismissive, totaling about 29%. I wonder how many of those are also MAGA extremists. But it seems like Americans are really waking up to the issue of climate change, and this is a really, really, really good thing. Let's hope that Americans also wake up to the issue of the need to mass deploy clean energy as a solution to climate change, because it's not just that we need to be concerned about climate change, it's also that we need to support the solutions and get everyone behind the solutions, that being wind, water, solar, electric vehicles, batteries, and the policies that help to aid their mass deployment so that we can all have access to that clean energy. So Peter Sinclair, folks, is a fantastic communicator on climate change, has been for as long as I know. I highly recommend that you follow him as well. So Gavin Schmidt over here, amplifying the messaging of Peter Sinclair. Moving on to Terry Hughes, I did want to highlight bit this one bit of news that he's discussing. He says, watch this space. The logical endpoint is an international treaty that will stop fossil fuel profiteers from destroying the planet. In the meantime, will Australia support China? It's worth noting that China has often stood in the way of international treaties that are aimed at limiting carbon emissions. And there's a reason for this, because the main reason being that China has doubled down and doubled down and doubled down again and again and again on coal. Now, it is worth noting that China does also have some of the largest infrastructure for building clean energy systems, but so long as China is married to harmful coal, it will not be a part of the solution when it comes to climate change. And so long as China is standing in the way of international treaties that limit emissions and help to reduce emissions, China will not be on the side of response to climate change. And I did want to highlight this article in the South China Morning Post, where China is asking the EU to justify an upcoming carbon tax at the World Trade Organization. And it's worth noting that Beijing has long opposed this tax that would limit emissions. Beijing says it does not comply to global trading rules. Um, and it's worth noting that when the tax takes full effect, companies wanting to import goods into the EU must buy certificates reflecting the emissions generated in producing them. And what are these emissions? Namely, coming from coal, which we mentioned before. China is burning more coal, a growing climate challenge. This is article from the New York Times. So when you hear China opposing trade rules that will limit emissions, it's due to the fact that China itself is over dependent upon coal, and China needs to rapidly shift from coal burning to wind and solar as a base for its economy. And at this point, there's really no excuse to not do it. The economies are there for mass deploying wind and solar as a replacement to coal, and doing it in an intelligent way to um, help. Well, doing it in an intelligent way that improves both grid resiliency and responsiveness in the grid by interconnecting the grid and by adding battery storage facilities and redundancies as well. It's worth noting that overall, those like Mark Jacobson have noted that the costs involved are less than continuing to burn fossil fuels and far less than the harm that comes from the climate crisis that results from the burning of fossil fuels. So, though China does have a very large clean energy infrastructure, we do need to hold China to account on its stance against international treaties aimed at reducing carbon emissions and helping to preserve a climate for everyone. And to end, I want to sum up with a beautiful re-rendering of Shakespeare from a climate change perspective by Dan Miller, which was, I believe, retweeted by, by Peter Gleek, retweeted by Peter Gleek. Also, another climate scientist and an expert on water. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this expose of the climate crisis in the voice of Shakespeare. And Dan Miller asked GPT-4 to explain climate change in the voice of Shakespeare, with the result being quite extraordinary. And I'm just going to go ahead and read it. So certainly there's some concern about our AI friends, but in this particular matter, Chat GPT was quite salient, and this by Dan Miller and Chat GPT. Prithee attend, thou gentle souls and wise, to hear a tale of warming in our skies, a change that doth the very earth beset, and causeth all in sundry ways to fret. In days of yore, when men didst burn with greed, the blackened stone and ebon oils did feed their wanton lust for progress, wealth, and might. Unwittingly they set a course for blight. By burning these, they spewed into the air a noxious gas, invisible yet fair, this gas which men doth call carbon dioxide, a potent brew that nature doth deride. Forsooth this gas with others of its kin doth form a veil round all the world so thin that traps the sun's warm rays within its fold, and causeth Mother Earth to sweat untold. By slow degrees the oceans and the land do feel the grip of this ungentle hand, which melteth ice and causeth seas to rise, and storm and drought to plague our mortal lives. Now mark me well, dear friends, as I relate the consequence of mankind's folly great. The time is nigh when all that dwell on earth must reckon with the cost of progress birth. To halt this change we must our ways amend, turned from the path which lends to our end, embrace the power of sun and wind and wave, and strive, dear friends, our noble world to save. And that concludes, with great aplomb, our exploration of what climate scientists are chatting about today. If I have been a bit broken and not as eloquent as I have been in recent days, please forgive me. I am still recovering from the sniffles, so both my mind and my body are not 100%, which is one of the reasons why I thought I would end with this very salient poem, a Shakespearean re-rendering of our present climate state, spoken with such verve and poetry. So thank you for joining me once again for this climate science chat, where we talk about what the climate scientists are talking about in order to try and amplify the voices of the good actors, and as a service, as a service to you, my good friends, and to all who love our beautiful coastlines and the great richness that we all share here on the earth. So thank you for joining me once again, and I